Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Dissidia Final Fantasy NT. Not the beta, the actual game this time. So let's start with the story. The story is basically the same as every other Dissidia game, which if you don't know, it's a bunch of Final Fantasy characters, heroes, and villains are all pulled into this world by some deity. In this case, it's Materia, and they're fighting some dude whose name I cannot remember off the top of my head, but he's pulled in the villains, and supposedly combat is the way to power these crystals so that they can go home. So really, the story, nothing unique, nothing that special, and it's never been a super in-depth story. That's true of the original Dissidias. It is just interesting to see these characters interact in this situation. Sadly, in this game, a console game, which you would expect to have much more depth, there's honestly less depth to those character interactions. Honestly, the story itself is pretty short, and I will explain to you why, because it's also heavily affected by a gameplay mechanic. Onto the audio. One thing I did love is that you get a good collection of music from the various Final Fantasies. I really enjoy that. I love the music from the Final Fantasy games, and I love getting to play a fighting game to that music. Next up, you've got the voiceover work, which is pretty good. I mean, it's kind of hard to judge how good it is because there's not a lot, and there's just not as intense of drama as you might want and would make it easy to judge. The fact that the voices do match up as well as they do with the characters, I think is cool because a lot of these games did not have voiceover work when they originally came out. So onto the gameplay mechanics. This is, at its core, a fighting game, but unlike a lot of fighting games, it's very open world, very open movement. Well, I guess not open world, but the arenas are large. And you can move about them in a very free manner. It is not a, side-scroller, face-to-face kind of fighting game. It's very action-oriented in the sense that it's a lot like playing a third-person action game. Now, when it does come to the combat, it is 3v3. There is no one-on-one, or at least not that I ever triggered. I had 3-on-1s when I was fighting summons, and I did have some times where it was 2-on-3 or something like that. And that could be a massive pain in the ass because your AI was not amazing, whereas the enemy AI could gang up on you. And I ran into that problem several times where I'm sitting there trying to wail on a dude and another dude keeps coming in and just wrecking my shop because I can't do what I need to do. And my AI is off doing who the hell knows what. Some of my concerns from the beta definitely are still present in the actual game. Specifically, the lack of depth, which I find truly disappointing because we finally get a console version, plain old new version of Dissidia, and it lacks the depth of the previous ones. And what I mean by that is you used to be able to customize your character's combat. Essentially, you could customize the moves that they had. It's not like you used dozens of different moves while in combat, but you had a bunch of moves, some that would provide you long range, short range, some that could beat people into a specific way, and then you do that to damage their bravery, and then once you've built up enough bravery points, you then hit them and it does an HP attack based on the bravery points, and you can knock them out in one actual HP hit. The one thing Dissidia NT does is you have set attacks. Your bravery attacks, those are set. You can't customize those. You can, to an extent, customize your HP attacks, but still, it doesn't provide the same variety as the previous games. You also can't customize abilities. You used to be able to customize abilities in the sense that they would give you certain bonuses in certain situations. And all of that is done to balance the multiplayer, essentially, because at its core, this game wants to be a multiplayer game. The problem is it doesn't really provide a lot of multiplayer content. But it also doesn't provide a ton of single player content. When you first boot up the game and you're like, okay, here's online mode, here's story mode, and here is the, I guess, single player mode. Story mode has almost no combat. Like, you go in and you have to earn tokens from playing either single player or multiplayer to unlock cutscenes, and then once you get far enough into that, there's occasionally battles. But overall, you feel very disconnected from the story and the combat. They don't seem to come together the way they should, because if you want to get more tokens, you have to leave the story mode and go to the multiplayer or the single player. And multiplayer only has like 2 or 3 modes, and it's okay at best. It's not even that great, and it takes a long time to actually get into a match. Then you've got your single player, which doesn't have a lot of modes either, until you get further in the story mode, which unlocks more stuff in the single player, but even then, it's still not that extensive. It's disappointing because the previous ones had a much more in-depth story mode. Like, the story itself, not that crazy, but there was so much more depth to the game mode itself. That was also true of the old single player modes as well. Overall, there's a distinct lack of gameplay compared to the previous games, which that's never acceptable in my opinion. I think a sequel should always strip away garbage, keep what's good, and add new stuff. And that is not what this game did. It's very bare bones, and it's pretty disappointing the amount of content that's actually there. I was glad that I found that there were some more single player modes, but still. As for the controls, I complained a bit about the controls in the beta, that I had issues triggering some of the other bravery attacks. I did not have that problem in the actual game. Triggering what few bravery attacks I did have on each character was so much easier in the actual game. It worked very well. Honestly, the controls overall do work well. I'm glad that they work well, because in a fighting game, if the controls don't work well, it's just... ugh. Lastly, the graphics. This is actually a very good looking game. It's not the best looking Final Fantasy game out there, but it is good looking. It's very beautiful. It's very bright, colorful. They did a good job bringing some of these characters who were like 8-bit to life. But that's not really unique to this game, because that was already done in previous Dissidia games. But for this game on its own, it does look good. It's not amazing though. Overall, I've got to say I'm disappointed in this game, which really kills me, because I loved the last two Dissidia games. I loved the PSP Dissidia games. And honestly, they were overall much better games than this. This was just a disappointing release. I would have preferred an HD re-release of those Dissidia games from the PSP. That being said, there is some enjoyment to be had in this game, but I can't recommend it at full price. That price is insane. If somebody were to buy it for you as a gift and it didn't cost you anything, sure, why not? If you only had to pay half price for it, sure, why not? But I would not recommend paying full price for this. I legitimately regret paying full price for this game. Okay, so in the comments below, why don't you tell me if you owned a PSP? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share, subscribe. Have a good one.